Thank you to Akelas and my one anonymous friend for helping me to put this together, and a big thank you to the community for staying so passionate about this game despite its flaws. Once upon a time, there was an amazing little dragon dogfighting game. This little game was fast-paced and difficult. Harsh wall damage pushed players into tight turning and smooth drifting around curvy corners, making for intense chases around maps designed to push you to your limits. 3 fireballs ensured 4 fast-paced games, and the Little Dragon game was so well balanced between its 3 classes that players deemed it just right. And they couldn't wait to see what the creators had in store next. But the creators, Playwing, didn't love the Little Dragon game. They didn't like its smooth drifting, its quick maneuvering, its difficulty, nor its balanced gameplay. So they decided to take a heavy axe and chop it up, cutting up parts they hated and pasting in things it never needed, in turn killing the Little Dragon game. They took a sewing kit and reattached the parts they wanted to keep and resurrected the game as something completely different. When the Dragon game lumbered back to players, lilting and unbalanced, they were appalled. Their once great Little Dragon game was now a Frankenstein monster, and it was coming apart at the seams. As dramatic as this little story is, it is unfortunately the reality that has been thrust upon many fans of Century Age of Ashes. The current version of the game is being condemned, while the beta version is being touted as probably the best version of the game for a whole slew of reasons, starting with the no rage and ending with some slick movement. But many players are in the dark about really why this is the case. Many of us, myself included, only learned about this game when it was released in 2021, and although we hear a lot about beta, we often only get bits and pieces of the full picture. So I aim to explain exactly why beta was so important and why so many players prefer it. I'm going to be open here. My information comes from players who were fortunate enough to experience both the first and second betas and who can compare the game to its current or live state. I have no personal experience of the live betas, but I thought it would be interesting to look at the differences between beta and the live game and why those changes had such an impact. So here is what Playwing changed, why it didn't work, and why players are upset. In beta, your hit points were standard across the board. You had a third fireball, you could drift around corners using momentum. There was a virtual effect with speed increase, wall damage could be devastating, there were no passives, and there was no rage. Now when we read these points so plainly, it would be easy to assume that beta was lacking, seeing as it has a lot less features than the current live game. But what we're missing is the full context of actually playing the game in this state, and why these elements in particular made the game fun. The third fireball, for example, ensured the game went a lot faster than it does now. Drifting also meant good solid maneuvering, and gave the players the option of taking corners at a blistering pace. And wall damage ensured tense moments as you attempted to weave through the caves. Sadly, all of these elements would be changed or gutted as the game progressed in development to be released, and would have various effects on the gameplay as a whole. And this happened despite some serious pushback. But let's look at these changes and why it hurt the game. Once again, this is only from what I've gathered, not my own personal experience. In the beginning, there was no rage. The closest we got in beta to rage was to trigger a Berserker mode after killing the Berserker Wraith in Carnage. Other than that, there was no rage. In beta, your dragon could only trigger rage after killing the Berserker Wraith in Carnage. What this meant was that during Carnage, all players would rush the Wraith, as becoming Berserk meant you were a badass for a short period and could rake up kills quickly. It was something to fight for, and if you wanted to catch up, you had to work for it, and you had to aim for the Wraith to do so. On the day they announced that Rage would become available for all dragons in all types of game modes, a worry spread throughout the forum, and for very good reason. Adding Rage meant that the Wraith in Carnage would essentially mean very little. Even if you tapped the dragon and went berserk, another dragon could easily swoop in and still knock you out. It took away something special from that particular game mode. It also would open the door to possibly destabilize the balance between the 3 classes. Although a new class is coming soon, in beta there were only 3. The Marauder was the heavy hitter, with some serious firepower in its frostbolts. The Phantom was the rogue class and could go ghost and use that to sneak attack enemies. Finally, the Windguard was the designated healer, and she could heal and protect her allies. All of these were well balanced. Bar maybe a bit of tweaking, but the Rage could, in theory, upset the apple cart. But the players were optimistic that the developers knew what they were doing. After all, they hadn't failed them yet. Unfortunately, this time they would. Upon the release of the Rage mode, many players quickly realized that where the game was a smooth balance before between 3 distinct classes, the balance was now completely blown into the wind. The Rage mode, in short, rewarded bad play. When you die enough times, your dragon gains access to its Rage mode and becomes pretty much indestructible for that short period of time. So in short, if you play badly, you are rewarded with God mode. They called it a catch-up mechanic, but it doesn't really work as well as they'd hope, especially not with specific classes. Marauder's Rage, for example, was broken at first, doing less damage than before. And the Phantom's Rage turned it into an essential God mode for 20 seconds, completely destroying the fine balance the classes were so praised for in beta. A beta player who wished to remain anonymous explained it like this. Carnage has the bounty system, the Drake Piercer and the Berserk Wraith. With the bounty system, if you were pulling ahead in kills, you had to respect your increased bounty if you don't want the other team to instantly tie it back up by getting too cocky and getting killed before your bounty expires. With the Berserker Wraith, only one player who gets the killing blow on it receives its awesome power that can turn the tide of a match. The Drake Piercer, being a one-shot, one-kill pickup in Carnage, gives players another opportunity to quickly deal damage with a problematic foe, including Berserkers. In beta, this worked awesome. The competition for the objectives was fierce because of how they gave the potential to massively swing the match one way or the other. After live with Rage being implemented, you may pick up the Berserk from the Wraith, but instead of becoming the boss of a round, you'll often find yourself running tail between your legs anyway from a God mode Phantom, because they weren't playing well a moment earlier. But the problem extended into the other game modes as well. The free-for-all winter event was basically an free-for-all style Carnage with Wraiths and Bounty, but it was painfully obvious that Rage impacted this one the most, where the objective of the event was to score as many lifetime bounty points as possible. Lobbies, for example, that were all Windguard, tend to have even the top person score relatively few points because of the self-heal self-berserk, making them especially hard to kill by one another. All Phantom free-for-all games scored 6 times as many points in comparison, but often had moments where no one could hurt each other because they were all in God mode. And most of the issues we had with the game mode was a direct result of Rage. Then we have the Rage farming. You can, in theory, simply let yourself get killed a few times as Phantom and then just go nuts every few minutes you respawn. Players who don't want to learn the nuances or tight maneuvering of the game go this route, and it can wreak havoc on matches, especially when you have a few players doing it on a team. So as a catch-up mechanic, the Rage is pretty broken. They would change the Phantom, nerf it quite heavily and knock its damage down somewhat. But the damage was done, and they're now battling to rebalance the game, due also in part to the passive abilities. Passives were not met with as much pushback as the Rage, simply for its subtle changes. The changes were simple. Marauder could recharge its powers when killing or assisting with a kill, the Phantom could now tear through shields, and the Windguard was not affected as easily by negatives, effects and shockwaves. There was a bit of a debate about the Marauder, one side claiming that the passive to reset abilities was completely overpowered, and the other group claiming there's not even close to being overpowered enough against the Phantom, which at this point is still a decent powerhouse. Another issue that was coughed out of the Dragon's Maw was the Phantom's ability to break shields faster. This made the Marauder's Frostbolt ability a bit moot, and once again elevated the Phantom as the better class overall. Akalas, who took a lot of time to explain all of this to me, explained this passive problem like this. While there is no inherent problem with adding passive abilities to the game, the current passives are way overtuned. Marauders is strong, but Phantoms is ridiculous. Needing one less fire breath to take off damage to remove shields is huge, especially in Spoils of War, where getting hit on your HP makes you drop gold and objectives. Windguard is the only one with a passive that really feels like a passive. What we're seeing is another failed balancing act from Playwing. They are giving passive abilities to these classes, with only the Windguard's ability truly being passive. Phantom and Marauder are more active passives, making them more powerful in a direct sense. Recharging your abilities is a damn big bonus, and being able to tear through shields is another hefty bonus. Many players will point out that by simply removing the passives and the rage, the game would instantly be rebalanced, but Playwing has thus far refused to even consider doing so. They're going to have to find another way to balance out these dragons. Again. Which is probably why they started tampering with the HP, or why they tampered with the HP in short. In beta, all of the dragons had 100 HP and 50 shields, meaning the playing field was even and you knew exactly what to hit and where to hit to make an enemy go tumbling down. In live, Phantom has less hit points. This comes as a direct result in the attempt to balance out the rage that created so many issues, and the active passive that is once again turning it now into a powerhouse. Because its rage is so out of control and overpowered, they had to nerf the Phantom extensively to balance out the game, even knocking its Ghost Fireball down a few points. Now, I will say that for me the HP is not the biggest issue. In short, a player with more HP will be harder to kill, and a player with less HP will be easier to kill. It's up for debate on whether it's better or worse for noobs or experienced players. That depends on player to player. But in theory, making dragons harder to kill means new players have more sky time, and so get more time to learn the game before being shot down. At the exact same time, because experienced players are, well, experienced with the game, they are still wholly efficient in shooting down enemies. So is the playtime really that far extended for new players? What it does show though is the extent they need to go to bring the game back into balance, when it was perfectly fine to begin with in beta. But they kept tampering. Probably one of the biggest things to be removed from the original game is the third fireball. A lot of players became frustrated when this update was implemented and announced. Playwing cited that this was to keep the game balanced and let the new players have a chance at getting ahead. But the logic of this is unsound, as explained further by Akelas. They removed the third fireball because they wanted the newcomers to not be killed as quickly. Yet, by removing that fireball, they not only made the game considerably less satisfying to play, hitting the 3 fireballs pretty much made a drum roll with the hit confirmation sound, but also raised the skill necessary to get a kill way higher and made the game feel slower. So good players are destroying newcomers, but newcomers have a hard time killing experienced players, so it backfired horribly in all ways. But despite backlash, they stuck to their guns and kept the change to help newbies. But Playwing is not well known for really helping newbies in any damned capacity. Just look at the wall damage. This was another change to supposedly help noobs, but this hurt the game at its core. Dogfight games are known for tight maneuvers and quick turns. At its very essence is the risk and reward factor of trying to take a sharp turn and hoping you make it to shake that bogey off your tail. It's called threading the needle. By gutting wall damage, they removed one of the biggest risks and some of the highest tension chases in the game. Right, not completely gutted, I think you do still get like about 5 points of damage, but they essentially gutted it. But here's a great explanation from a beta player who wished to remain anonymous. In the genre, it's a pretty crucial part of the game, and the thrill of threading the needle was something Century used to do very well. The skill check of high-stakes maneuvers through the castle to either claim your quarry or shake your hunter was fun and a huge hook to try to get ever better at flying. The nooks and caves in both of the original 6v6 maps were clearly designed all around this aspect of the game. The way you can use and interact with the environment was half of what made the game such an addicting blast before. Removing the risk from this threw this entire aspect of the flight-focused game out the window. As we can see, it harmed the game's core gameplay, but it goes a little further than that and actually breaks one of the attacks. Blast is an interesting ability that is tricky to master and great in its potential, or used to be. In short, you shoot a shockwave to knock players back from a certain point. You may have seen this being used often during Gates of Fire matches, where players use Blast to get opposing players away from the flag. It's one of the more interesting, nuanced attacks Playwing added to the game, and at one point it could kill dragons. Blast actually knocked you into walls, and you took wall damage from that. Meaning if you spotted, for example, 2 dragons slipping into a cave with low HP, and you shot a blast in there, chances were good 1 or 2 of them won't be coming back out. Unfortunately, by nerfing the wall damage, the blast has now been rendered moot and almost useless as an offensive weapon. This once again just hurt the game. But they didn't quite stop there. Oh boy, where most of these issues are locked in gameplay, This one is both gameplay and aesthetic, and I have no idea why they changed it. I'm going to keep this example up as I'm talking, just so that you can see what I'm talking about. The player on the left is from beta, the one on the right is the same player in the current state of the game. We can easily see that the left one feels a lot faster, and that is for one reason only: visual effects. When the dragon speeds up, the screen makes up this small air streaks, making it look like you're speeding up, and so you feel like, you're speeding up. This visual effect was removed for absolutely no reason, and I feel like it needs to be brought back because it looks really cool. The second issue is the change of drifting. Seeing as I have no experience with this, I'm going to quote Achilles again to make sure this gets translated well. From the first beta to the second beta, they took the amazing mouse controls that were present in first beta, raw input, and made it feel, in my opinion, awful in second beta and release. Now it emulates a joystick. From second beta to release, they actually kinda slowed movement down in the dumbest, most egregious way they could have done it. Now the dragons from the betas to release still move at the same speed, but here's the thing. In the betas you had a technique called drifting, where you could boost and then brake to make a sharp corner while still keeping the acceleration from the boost. This little detail of being able to keep the boost acceleration on a brake just added so much depth to the movement and skill ceiling of the game. And they gutted this technique on release by making it so that braking right after boosting just cancels the boost acceleration, effectively killing drifting. Now, I am aware that you can still accelerate while braking to change the cornering behavior, but the differences between accelerating while braking versus boosting while braking is night and day. So now movement just feels sluggish because you can't do the insane cornering like in the betas. This is the point that hurts the most for me, and I'm guessing for a lot of people as well. So, is beta better? To answer that question fairly, I must acknowledge that a lot of these changes that were made is actually being accepted and enjoyed by many new players who are coming into the game. For example, some people argue that 2 fireballs are actually a lot better than 3, and that the rage factor is actually a lot of fun and creates a lot of chaos that makes the game into something that is just fun and not necessarily so heavily skill-based as it is for others. But this does not change the fact that a lot of people still lament the loss of beta. But as we all know, Century Age of Ashes problems does not end and begin with the changes made to the original version. Leveling is still a grind. Ranked matches are dominated by stacked teams, with players abandoning ship halfway through. Shop is on a constant rotation, matches are now on a constant rotation, and they're now expecting players to advertise the game for them instead of just running a good ad campaign. These issues do not include the predatory prices, with no discounts, even if you own half of what is in the package you're buying, and the constant abuse of the word exclusive while they keep bringing back those exclusive items over and over again.
You keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
No wonder the Steam numbers are falling below 200 at this point. But was beta better? Yes, I think the game's simplicity and focused on skill and fast-paced action is what made it so appealing, and what made so many players come back to it. I think there was a lot of love in the beta, and I think that Playwing decided to make a different game. And it is a different game. Despite having the same name, beta and live are too far apart to be considered anywhere close to the same. They've changed and removed so much that the core of the game has been gutted, and all that remains are bits and pieces still dangling about. There is still a whisper of what could be considered Century, but most of it are just echoes of a game that has been lost through unneeded meddling. If we look at the comments alone, we can see that beta was a style game that was far more enjoyable than the current imbalanced mess we have been left with. And that is why it is dying. They had something great, something wonderful that people praised high and low. But it wasn't enough for Playwing. Now we're stuck with this gutted, chopped up creature we should be accepting because it's still Century. But hopefully, somewhere in their basement, Playwing still has the parts we loved, and they can, with time, reattach some of it to make the monster look more like the little dragon game we all fell in love with.